Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Nichol asked me to share a little bit about my story. Other than I do have to say, you must know that the space has arrived when the investment bankers start showing up. So, but just a little about my story, and I'll apologize for the commercial that's up here in advance. But I actually started my career as an entrepreneur, Stanford electrical engineering student. Woke up one day, decided I didn't want to spend my life in a lab, and did what a few of my classmates did, started a company. So we had a decent run. I think the most important thing of which is I firmly believe that entrepreneurship is the biggest learning and growth opportunity any of us can take. And starting a company when you're 25, I can undoubtedly say that's true. Many, many lessons, grateful for most of them. Learned a lot about timing. Sold my company in 2001 instead of 2000. That's a big difference for those of you that might not have been around in that particular bubble. But I transitioned over to investment banking at that point. I've been exclusively technology focused, as you can imagine, with an engineering background. And spent 8 years learning the craft with some very senior professionals. Spent some time in Europe focusing on cross-border deals. 2011, found my way back to the US and launched the tech, media, and telecom practice for a larger middle market firm who didn't have one. So we went on a tear, ended up finishing there our last year as number 5 in tech M&A for boutique investment banks, which is quite an accomplishment coming out of nowhere. But that's the professional side. Personally, as I'm sure many in the room, life serves you plenty of opportunities to wake up. I didn't listen for a while, and then those opportunities got louder and bigger, and then I did wake up, start to wake up gratefully. So 15 years ago, I started what I call my consciousness journey, and whether that's starting with daily practice and meditation, all kinds of modalities, physical, energetic, emotional, plant medicine, etc. It's been an amazing journey, and it's probably outside of family my deepest value. And so if you look on one hand, I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars for companies. I've sold billions of dollars worth of value into very large name brand businesses, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. But these two worlds really were separate. And I was struggling with that. A friend of mine has this term I really love called divine discontent. Nothing's wrong, but yet it all hasn't clicked into right yet either. And I have to admit, I probably spent 4 or 5 years in this molting phase. And then I remember the day or the week I was on a trip, Necker Island, with a group of social impact entrepreneurs called Mavericks. I think a few of them might even be in the room. There's one. And watching Richard Branson live his life is amazingly inspirational. And it just all clicked in one day. I call it the fully integrated life. You can't tell if he's working. You can't tell if he's playing. His friends are there. His family's there. And he's making a difference in the world. And it all just blends together. And I just went, oh, yes, I will have some of that. And it just all clicked for me that day. And I went, okay, if I have a 30-year arc of where I'm going to be productive, that's what it's going to look like. So I went home, talked to my partners and said, basically, hey, I'm out of here, but I'd love to keep the band together. So long story short, we formed NFluence. And while we look on the outside a lot like a traditional boutique investment bank focused on tech, our ethos is really to work with what we call mission-aligned businesses, which is companies who have a purpose beyond profit. Now, we do lots of other venture ecosystem deals as well, because I think you have to do those well to be good at mission aligned. And then really to put the stake in the ground. If any of you play in capital markets at all, there's one main conference called SoCap. It's massive, 5,000 people. It's hard to find your community. So we said, hey, our stake in the ground will be the Mission Aligned Growth Summit, which is a conference for emerging growth companies, the capital that wants to back them in mission aligned, which is, again, purpose beyond profit. That's where Nichol and I met. She came to speak. We started a geek out jam session on all things consciousness, transformative technology, et cetera, which has sort of led to what we've been up to over the last couple of months. I do want to say just quickly, the partnership goes the other way too. Nichol is going to come with us to New York in April. That's our next conference. We are highlighting what we call digital wellness and transformative technologies at the conference. So we'll have some companies to present. We do investor matching. If you're Series A, B, and later, find me, email me, whatever, because we do a lot of investor matching at that event. So when there's a good time for capital, the investors who are interested, again, in Mission Align, we'll have them there. So end of commercial. And so where Nichol and I really connected was around this idea of accelerating global consciousness or global well-being and health. There's a lot of momentum starting to coalesce behind the SDGs. SDG number 3 is global health and well-being. And our unique points in the ecosystem around how do you create maximum leverage to drive that change. And so we looked around the landscape, and there's not really a lot of good coverage in the financial markets, capital markets, depending on what you want to call it, for the space. But there started to be some pretty good anecdotal stories coming out. Calm with $1 billion valuation, Headstrong before it, which had done a nice job accessing growth capital markets. Livongo, a name you may not all know as well, which IPO'd this year, which has provided a lot of juice and energy into that segment. And we decided that this would be a good year to really dig in and say, all right, what's happening on the capital side of all of the things you're going to talk about for the next couple of days? So we did, I would say, sort of try to take a little bit more of an expansive view into wellness, or what we call digital wellness more broadly. As investment bankers, what we're trying to do is look at markets that collide, that collapse, patterns from previous industries and eras that will shed light and insight onto how a new market might develop. So we started a little more on the body and physical health side that goes to mental and emotional wellness, workplace and life. This is a 40-page report, so I'm not a big believer in flipping through a ton of words in these things. So we're going to publish it after the conference, so everybody here will get a copy. I would also say that we love feedback. So this is version 1. We iterate these about every 6 months. If you're passionate about something, if there's companies we don't profile, we're wide open for feedback. But the thing that we really noticed, and sort of the macro thesis that I have is, as you see, sort of on one hand, consumer demand out of wellness really rising and becoming more and more, there's more and more awareness around it, and that's where a Calm and $1 billion valuation, people are like, wait, what? Really? A meditation app? All of us wouldn't do that, of course, but other folks with less awareness. And to really take another market, which is the healthcare ecosystem, which tends to be very clinical, has traditionally had a rehabilitation orientation, had a fix-it orientation. And as the healthcare market shifts more into prevention and outcomes-based, I think there are just some really, really interesting things happening there, because at the end of the day, my fundamental thesis is if you want to be successful, build a really large commercially successful business. And I don't want to get too philosophical or political, depending on your orientation, but I happen to believe that capitalism, when done consciously, with impact in mind and a stakeholder mindset, is the biggest leverage point for good out there. And so the thing that Nichol and I really kind of came together on the idea of the report generally, and then what we want to do with this over time, is these markets really need to grow these companies and these ecosystems into sustainable economic engines in and of themselves. And maybe that has some trade-offs from time to time, and maybe certain things might not be as idealistic, but at the end of the day, if you want to reach millions, and if you want to access capital markets to reach millions more, it's got to be a commercial successful enterprise as well. And not to say there isn't a place for nonprofits and philanthropy and all of that. Absolutely there is. Capitalism doesn't impact everything, but that's the core idea that we're kind of working on here. But these markets ultimately come together pretty interesting ways, because one of those elements of capital is if you can unlock the healthcare system and the 16 or 18% of GDP that we spend in healthcare, as certain areas that are in wellness today become more outcomes-based, and there's an increasing proof in those outcomes, you'll start to have very big companies, whether they are conscious or not, pushing wellness technologies that impact global consciousness and health. Why? Just because it makes sense financially. And for me, that's a huge win, because more dollars, momentum, people impacted, at the end of the day, is the goal. And so while I don't think wellness, digital wellness, transformative tech, and healthcare market collapse into a single market, I do think there will be, and this is kind of a ways out, but tightly coupled aspects of those two markets so that you have consumer demand. One of the interesting things that we see today is the enterprise demand, the business demand really starting to take off for these technologies. And then that third leg of the stool is unlocking capital out of the healthcare ecosystem. So I'm talking a lot here, so let me speed up a little bit. There wouldn't be a good investment banking report without a market landscape, so we did that too. And you can see how it sort of breaks down. And just to preview the report a little bit, is we take each one of these segments. We highlight some companies. We highlight what we think are interesting trends. Don't worry about pictures. You'll get this in your inbox at some point. What capital is going in? What are interesting trends? What are deals happening in the sector? What's M&A look like? Et cetera, almost box by box throughout the whole report. And then we look at some more emerging areas where maybe there hasn't been a lot of activity. One of the interesting things to my previous point about healthcare and wellness is wellness broadly, digital wellness specifically. It's not like there are a lot of natural consolidators out there. And so at the end of the day, a lot of these businesses need some exits. So it'll be real. That is one of the areas where we look at the healthcare side of the equation, and do people get enlightened? And there are a few examples of that already. United Health, Rally Health is an example. But we think that there's going to be a lot of interesting developments. So watch this space. We'll keep profiling it. So I'll wrap there, other than we're excited to get this out and in your hands. I'm really grateful to Nichol for our partnership. I'm excited about what we're going to do together over time. I'm excited that you're all here. And I do want to tell just one more quick story. I'm pretty active in the conscious capitalism movement, as you could probably tell from my talk. A friend of mine, most of my friends are still entrepreneurs. Not sure what that says about bankers, but he has this story where he runs a business that's about 100 people, mostly tradespeople. And his upbringing was a little harrowing. And the passion that he brings about bringing consciousness to his employees and conscious capitalism generally isn't the productivity of his business, although he gets that, isn't the low turnover in his employee set, although he does get that. What lights him up is the impact of when those employees go home and they sit with their families and they extend that consciousness and that behavior and all of that to their families. And that just gets me all kinds of fired up. Like, that's what I'm doing here. That's what I'm spending the next 30 years of my time. And if we can do that, the ripples that extend from a single person, a single company, a market, that's what I'm here to try to get a lot of capital push behind. And so there you go. Thank you.